Meditation on emptiness is a guided journey into one of the most challenging and transformative ideas in Buddhist philosophy, the insight that nothing exists independently, solidly, or from its own side. Jeffrey Hopkins does not present emptiness as an abstract theory to admire from a distance, but as a lived realization that reshapes how suffering, identity, and freedom are understood. The book begins by gently dismantling the everyday assumption that people and objects exist in the way they appear to us. Hopkins shows how we instinctively believe that things possess a fixed core, an inherent thisness, and how this belief quietly fuels attachment, fear, and conflict. Emptiness is introduced not as nihilism, but as the absence of this imagined solidity. Hopkins carefully builds the reader's confidence by emphasizing that emptiness does not mean nothing exists. Instead, things exist dependently, arising through causes, conditions, and mental designation. This distinction becomes the emotional backbone of the book, reassuring the reader that meaning, ethics, and compassion remain intact, and are in fact strengthened. As the narrative deepens, Hopkins introduces the Madhyamaka philosophical tradition, especially the work of Nagarjuna, as a precise tool for dismantling mistaken views. He explains how logical analysis is used not to construct new beliefs, but to exhaust the mind's tendency to grasp at fixed conclusions. This intellectual rigor becomes a form of meditation in itself. The book then turns toward practice, showing how analytical meditation is applied step by step. Hopkins describes how one selects an object, such as the self, and searches for it among body, mind, and experiences. When no independent self can be found, the meditator is encouraged to rest in that absence without panic or rejection. A key storytelling strength of the book is how Hopkins anticipates emotional resistance. He acknowledges the fear that can arise when familiar mental anchors dissolve, and he treats this fear as a sign of progress rather than failure. Emptiness, he explains, initially feels destabilizing because it contradicts deeply ingrained habits of perception. Hopkins emphasizes repeatedly that insight into emptiness must be balanced with compassion. Without compassion, emptiness becomes cold and abstract. Without emptiness, compassion can become emotionally overwhelmed. The book presents these two qualities as mutually reinforcing, like wings that allow the mind to move freely. As the reader progresses, the tone shifts from explanation to lived experience. Hopkins describes how moments of insight may be brief, subtle, and easily missed, yet deeply transformative. He encourages patience, reminding the reader that emptiness is realized gradually, through familiarity rather than force. The book also addresses common misunderstandings, particularly the fear that emptiness negates responsibility or moral action. Hopkins explains that understanding dependent arising actually increases ethical sensitivity, because actions are seen as interconnected rather than isolated. Harm and care both ripple outward in ways previously unseen. One of the most actionable aspects of the book is its guidance on integrating emptiness into daily life. Hopkins suggests noticing moments of strong emotional reaction and gently examining what is being assumed as solid or permanent. These everyday investigations become doorways into insight. Hopkins uses clear metaphors to make subtle ideas tangible, such as comparing inherent existence to a mirage that appears convincing until examined closely. The mirage does not disappear violently, it simply loses its authority over perception. This storytelling approach makes the philosophy feel humane and accessible. The revised edition strengthens the pedagogical arc, refining explanations and clarifying points that often confuse readers encountering emptiness for the first time. Hopkins's voice remains patient and grounded, guiding rather than persuading. The book feels less like instruction and more like accompaniment. As the later chapters unfold, emptiness is revealed not as an endpoint but as an opening. With less fixation on self and objects, the mind becomes more flexible, responsive, and kind. Hopkins frames this as a natural outcome rather than a moral demand. The emotional payoff of the book lies in its promise of freedom that is quiet rather than dramatic. Emptiness does not eliminate pain, but it loosens the tightness around it. Suffering becomes workable rather than overwhelming. By the end, meditation on emptiness leaves the reader with a reoriented relationship to reality. What once felt solid now feels spacious, what once felt threatening now feels workable, and what once felt isolating now feels deeply interconnected. The book closes not with certainty, but with an invitation to continue looking, questioning, and resting in openness.